everyone knows the bias of the travel hour is to travel by train, and we have one of the heroes, I would say, of the railroad world. Welcome to the travel hour, Helmut Mokel.
Good morning.
You have been traveling by train in Russia and China since 1978, and if I could introduce you to our listeners, Helmut is the director, owner of Eurasia Tours, which is based in Germany. But to say that it's based anywhere is to be inaccurate, in that you're a citizen of the world, and especially the train world. You have traveled probably, what, 1 million miles by train in your long career?
I never counted the mileage I traveled, but I traveled in all 5 continents, and I organized special trains in more than 40 countries on all continents.
So for our listeners, these are private trains, so to speak. The cars are luxury cars. They have showers, they have dining cars, they have club cars, they have lecture halls even. And in particular, our interest is the train, probably the longest train ride in the world, which is Moscow to Beijing. Take our listeners, if you can, on one of these journeys. It starts in Moscow. You fly to Moscow? Is that how the trip starts?
Yes, usually our guests fly into Moscow, and there we have a train ready to board. It's a very long train containing of 10 or 20 cars even.
So this might be 10 or 20 cars. These are sleeping cars, but deluxe sleeping cars. A little, I think our listeners know the Orient Express that went from Paris to Venice more recently, and there's an Asian Orient Express, and this is Moscow to Beijing. So you start in Moscow, and the first stop is where?
The first stop is Kazan, which is at the Volga River, the longest river of Europe.
So, and the train runs overnight, comes in the next morning, buses meet the train, so you have a day in a Russian city, and then you're back on the train. What time? 2, 3 in the afternoon, something like that?
Yes, the idea is to have a cruise, but on rails, having the train as your continuing home. Usually we leave cities in the afternoon, something about 3, 4, 5 p.m., arrive in the next morning in the next place. Traveling overnight.
And these are the historic cities of Russia, and after Yekaterinburg, the Asian part of Russia, so it goes Kazan, Yekaterinburg, which is where the Tsar and his family sadly were killed during the Russian Revolution, and the stop after that is Novosibirsk?
The next stop is Novosibirsk. The interesting point is that many of our stops are so-called closed cities, former closed cities, which were not accessible to foreigners during Soviet times.
So now that with the reforms in Russia, these cities are open. Do you have a name for your train? It's called the Trans-Mongolian, I believe. Is that right?
We do the Trans-Mongolian route, and we call the train the Grand Trans-Siberian Express.
So it does traverse most of Siberia into Irkutsk, and then down to Mongolia, and from then into Beijing. It's a 2-week journey, but you're not on the train for all 2 weeks, for about 10, 11 days. Is that right?
You spend 10 nights on the train, and before usually our guests stay 1 or 2 nights in Moscow. After the tour arrives in Beijing, they stay 2, 3 nights in Beijing. There is only 1 night in a hotel during the tour, which is in Mongolia.
For travelers who haven't taken trains recently, but certainly haven't taken Russian trains recently, the idea of going from Moscow to Beijing on the train must sound a bit out of Marco Polo. It evokes cities of the East, of Jules Verne, who wrote about the messenger of the Tsar going to Tomsk, and cities that we read about but rarely ever get to see it. This way, you're in the cities, but you're moving on, as you say, a land cruise. Does it have is one of the cities, Moscow, Beijing, a particular favorite of yours?
Well, I love both of these cities. I would like to live in both of these cities. They are dynamic. They are probably the most dynamic cities of the world now.
I don't know Beijing, but I do know Moscow. And as you say, art galleries, restaurants, shopping, architecture, history. It's on every street corner. And it's all it's old, but it's new. It's a city remaking itself almost by the minute. You come 6 months later, and the skyline will be just that much different. Tell our listeners a little bit. We're on the Travel Hour. Our guest is Helmut Mokel. The company is Eurasia Tours. The trip is the Grand Trans-Siberian Express between Moscow and Beijing. Talk a little bit about the food. Travelers are nervous about food. They might not think they want to eat Russian food or even Chinese food in China. Tell us about the meals that they'll get on board, and tell us about one of your favorite meals.
We are aware of the fact that many travelers consider Russian food as very heavy, so we instructed our chefs to do it in a more lighter way, as the Europeans and the Americans would usually prefer food on board.
Are there Russian wines that we should know about?
Not really Russian wines, but there are very good wines from Moldavia, from Georgia, and even the Chinese have very good wines. The Great Wall brand is very well known.
Helmut, you've been all over China, all over Russia, all over the former Soviet Union by train. You've been to the Caucasus, which is in the south part of then Soviet Union, now the independent states of Azerbaijan and Georgia. Does one of the countries stick out in your mind as a beautiful place for our listeners to someday find their way, maybe with one of your trains?
There is besides the Trans-Siberian route, there is a very interesting other route in terms of cultural aspects. It's the Silk Road, and we do it from time to time on the way from Moscow to Astrakhan, and then into Uzbekistan to places like Bukhara, Samarkand, Tashkent. And further on we can go into China. Someday
go all the way through to Urumqi, I think is the name of the Chinese city. Our guest is Helmut Mokel. The company is Eurasia Tours. Let's get the website for our listeners, because they might want to make one of these runs with.
It's EurasiaExpress.de.
Eurasia, no hyphen. EurasiaExpress.de. The guest is Helmut Mokel. The subject is Trans-Siberian luxury trains. Thanks for joining us on the program.
Thank you very much, Matthew.